The wedding hall glowed with chandeliers, laughter, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Everyone's eyes were on my daughter, radiant in white, as she raised her glass for a toast. My heart swelled with pride, but before I could even breathe in that joy, her voice cut through the air, sharp as a blade. "This day is perfect," she said sweetly, her smile stretching. "Except for one thing. My mother." The room froze. I felt dozens of eyes burn into me, judgment dripping like venom. She listed my failures one by one, times I wasn't there, sacrifices twisted into shame. Each word landed like a lash. Her new in-laws smirked, nodding. And across the table, her father-in-law leaned back, smug, sipping his wine like a man watching a play he thought he'd written. I gripped the tablecloth to steady myself, heat rising behind my eyes. They thought this moment would shatter me, grind me into silence. But they had no idea. Because before the night ended, the truth would break them, and it wouldn't come from me. People see weddings as perfect fairy tales, but they don't see the years of quiet sacrifice that lead up to that moment. Long before the chandeliers, the flowers, and the speeches, there was just me, a single mother trying to hold life together with frayed threads and calloused hands. My name doesn't matter. What matters is the years I poured into my daughter's life, often invisible, often unthanked. I worked double shifts at the diner, came home with aching feet and coffee stains on my apron, and still managed to stitch her Halloween costumes by hand. I packed lunches with smiley-face notes. I sat up all night when she had fevers, whispering promises that she'd never face the world alone. But life has a cruel way of twisting devotion into weakness, especially when there's someone eager to rewrite your story. My ex-husband Daniel had walked out when our daughter was barely 7. He wanted freedom, adventure, a life without responsibilities. Yet when he returned years later, remarried and wealthy, he was suddenly the hero. The man who had abandoned us now bought my daughter shiny gifts, whispered doubts in her ear, and painted me as the bitter obstacle holding her back. It started small, him giving her an iPhone while I scraped together money for school supplies. He'd buy her branded dresses while I stretched grocery bills to cover her braces. And each time she looked at me with a little more disappointment, as if I wasn't enough. The pattern deepened. Family gatherings turned into minefields. He'd host dinners at his grand new house, where his wife, perfect hair, perfect smile, would lean close to my daughter and say, "Your mother means well, but she just doesn't understand your potential." Laced in sugar, their poison seeped in. I swallowed it all. I thought love, steady and patient, would win in the end. One memory still burns like a scar. Our daughter was 16, getting ready for a school dance. I had saved for months, cutting corners, and finally managed to buy her a soft blue dress she had once pointed at in a shop window. I placed it on her bed, expecting joy. Instead, she frowned. "Dad already bought me one," she said flatly, holding up a shimmering silver gown twice the price. "This one looks cheap." Her words pierced me deeper than any knife. She didn't see the sacrifices stitched into that blue fabric. The late nights, the skipped meals, the endless hours at the diner. She only saw what they wanted her to see, that I was lesser, unworthy, replaceable. That night, after she left, I sat in the quiet house and pulled out my old wooden jewelry box. Inside lay the photo album, pictures of birthdays, Christmases, scraped knees, bedtime stories, proof of my years, proof of love. I ran my fingers over the photographs, reminding myself of the truth. That box became my anchor. But the humiliation didn't stop. At church gatherings, neighbors whispered about how well Daniel was doing, how lucky my daughter was to have him back in her life. No one mentioned the years he left us alone. No one mentioned the bills that arrived with his name still on them. I became the shadow in my own story, present, but unseen. And yet I kept going. I kept working, kept loving, kept believing that when my daughter was old enough to see through the illusions, she'd recognize me. But I was wrong, because when she got engaged, the walls truly closed in. Daniel and his new family orchestrated every detail of the wedding, pushing me further into the background. My name was left off invitations. My contributions, small but heartfelt, were brushed aside. And at the rehearsal dinner, I overheard something that turned my stomach cold. Her future father-in-law was laughing, saying, "Well, at least she knows who the real parent is. You did all the heavy lifting, Daniel. That other one just existed." The table erupted in laughter. Except me. I stood in the corner, invisible. That was the first sting that told me something much bigger and crueler was coming. And it did. Weddings bring people together or tear them apart. In my case, it felt like every step toward the altar pushed me further into exile. It began with the invitations. My name was missing. Instead of "together with their families," it read simply, "Daniel and Clara request the honor of your presence." Clara, his new wife, had claimed a mother's title without ever lifting a finger to earn it. I remember staring at the glossy cardstock, my throat tight, as if my entire motherhood had been erased with one careful omission. I thought maybe it was a mistake. But when I asked my daughter, her eyes narrowed. "Mom, don't make this about you," she snapped. "Dad and Clara are paying for everything. You should be grateful." Grateful. The words stung like acid. The weeks leading up to the wedding blurred into a nightmare. Whenever I offered help, folding napkins, arranging flowers, anything, someone waved me off. Clara smiled with her polished teeth and said, "Don't worry, we've got this handled." Daniel chimed in, "Just show up, all right?" That's the least stressful thing for everyone. Everyone. Everyone but me. The isolation crept into my bones. At night, I lay awake, listening to the hollow tick of the clock, replaying every scene in my mind. The laughter when my name was dismissed, the sideways glances, my daughter's indifference. Sleep became a stranger, and with it came headaches, nausea, a heaviness pressing on my chest. They weren't just planning a wedding, they were writing me out of the story. And then came the smear campaign. Small comments, casual but cutting, spread like wildfire among relatives. I overheard Clara whispering at a bridal shower, "She's always been unstable. Daniel had to hold everything together for years." Another time, Daniel casually remarked, "You know she never really supported our daughter's dreams. She wanted her to settle, to play small lies, all lies, yet people nodded, eyes darting to me with thinly veiled pity. Slowly, I became the villain in their version of events. The pressure mounted until I felt I might collapse. But just when I thought I was truly alone, something shifted. It was a late evening at the diner, long after most customers had gone. My coworker, Maria, noticed my trembling hands as I tried to balance a tray. "You okay?" she asked softly. The question cracked something inside me. For the first time, I spoke the truth aloud. How I felt erased. How my daughter saw me as nothing. How the lies were closing in. I expected judgment. Instead, Maria's eyes softened. "You're not crazy," she said firmly. "They're gaslighting you. But people like that," she shook her head, "they always overplay their hand." I stared at her, startled. No one had ever said it out loud before. She reached into her bag and pulled out a worn notebook. "Start writing it down. Every slight, every comment, every lie. Don't argue with them. It won't work. Just document. Trust me. Truth has a way of coming out." That was the first time someone reminded me I wasn't alone. And for the first time in weeks, I went home not to cry, but to write. Pen scratching against paper, I began to build a quiet arsenal of truth. Little did I know, it would one day bring the entire charade crashing down. The weeks marched forward, each day another reminder that I was being erased. I thought I'd grown used to the humiliation, but nothing prepared me for what happened next. One evening, I received a letter in the mail, formal, embossed with gold. At first, I thought it was another wedding update, but when I opened it, my hands began to shake. It was from Daniel's lawyer. A carefully worded notice informed me that, in the interest of maintaining peace and dignity during the ceremony, I was to refrain from making any speeches, participating in key moments, or causing unnecessary distractions. In other words, sit down, stay quiet, and disappear. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands. A flash of police lights from the street spilled through my window, casting red and blue across the words like sirens screaming, "Unwanted, unwanted, unwanted." And then I realized it wasn't just Daniel. It was her father-in-law, Edward. Wealthy, influential, a man who had built his reputation on control. I'd seen the way he leaned across tables, lowering his voice so people bent closer to catch his words. The way his checks always came last at dinners, so everyone saw how much he'd paid. He wasn't just part of this. He was orchestrating it. The wedding rehearsal confirmed it. Standing in the back of the church, I overheard Edward speaking to Daniel. "She's a liability. You've built a good narrative. Don't let her ruin it. Keep her quiet, and after the wedding, she'll fade out. Fade out. As if I were a shadow, not a mother." I wanted to scream, to expose every lie, but Maria's words echoed in my head. Don't fight their game. Document. Prepare. So I did. I pulled out the wooden jewelry box, my secret archive, and added the lawyer's letter. I stacked it alongside my notes of whispered insults, missed acknowledgments, backhanded comments. Piece by piece, I was building a record of their cruelty. And then came the turning point. At a final vendor meeting, Clara and Edward cornered me. "Since Daniel and I are covering expenses," Clara began smoothly, "we think it's best you refrain from attending the rehearsal dinner. It's just for close family, close family." Something inside me hardened. For weeks I had shrunk, but in that moment, I felt steel rise in my spine. I pulled out my phone and, with a calmness that surprised even me, pressed record. "Could you repeat that?" I asked. Clara blinked, faltered. Edward leaned in, his smile tightening. "This is unnecessary." "No," I said evenly. "It's very necessary." Their eyes flickered, realizing too late that the script had shifted. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply ended the recording, slid my phone into my purse, and walked away. For the first time, I felt the balance tip, just slightly, in my favor. But power-hungry people don't retreat. They double down. A week later, whispers spread that I was unstable, that I had threatened to ruin the wedding. Daniel himself called me, his voice cold. "If you can't behave," he said, "we'll have security remove you." For a moment, fear stabbed through me, but then my eyes fell on the jewelry box, on the stack of evidence inside. I wasn't powerless, not anymore. I pressed the box closed, my heartbeat steady. "They thought they still had control," I whispered to myself. They didn't. After that phone call from Daniel, the storm truly broke. Rumors began swirling faster than I could catch them. At church, whispers followed me like shadows. "She's jealous of Clara. She wants attention. She's unwell, you know." At the grocery store, a woman I'd known for years avoided my eyes, muttering something about trouble at the wedding. Even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly calling my daughter, warning her about me. It was Edward's hand at work. I could see his fingerprints everywhere. He knew how to plant doubt, how to shape a narrative, until people believed it without question. Clara fanned the flames with her sugary voice, and Daniel stood proudly at their side. And my daughter? She believed them. "Mom?" she said one afternoon, her tone icy. Please stop. You're making things harder for everyone. If you care about me, you'll stay in the background. Stay in the background. The words rattled inside me. But here's the thing about being cornered. Eventually, you stop retreating. You start standing. I didn't fight their gossip with more gossip. I didn't chase people down, begging them to see the truth. Instead, I listened to Maria's advice. Document, prepare, endure. Every lie that reached me, I wrote down. Every time someone repeated Clara's words, I noted it. I saved text messages, voicemails, anything I could gather. My old jewelry box grew heavier by the week, its wooden frame swelling with proof. But I did more than collect evidence. I began to rebuild myself. I started therapy, something I had never thought I deserved. Each session chipped away at the shame they had planted in me. I began to see the patterns for what they were: manipulation, control, emotional abuse. For the first time, I realized their cruelty said nothing about my worth, and everything about theirs. I also found allies in quiet places. Maria stood firmly by my side. A neighbor, Mrs. Patel, pulled me aside after church and whispered, "Don't let them scare you. People see more than you think." Even my manager at the diner, usually gruff, offered to swap shifts so I could breathe. Small gestures, but each one reminded me I wasn't invisible, not to everyone. Meanwhile, Edward's grip began to show cracks. At one family dinner, I watched as he barked orders at the caterer, his face turning red when something wasn't perfect. His temper, usually hidden behind charm, slipped into view. Clara's hand trembled when she refilled her wineglass. And my daughter, oh, I saw it. The flicker of doubt in her eyes when Edward spoke too harshly, when Clara pushed too hard. She tried to hide it, but it was there. Seeds of uncertainty, just waiting for truth to water them. The tension built toward something inevitable. I could feel it in my bones. One night, sitting alone at the kitchen table, I opened the jewelry box and spread everything out. The letter from Daniel's lawyer, the recordings on my phone, the stack of notes, the photographs of me raising my daughter alone. The evidence formed a story clearer than any rumor could. A story not of instability, but of survival. Not of failure, but of sacrifice. I pressed my palm against the photos, steadying my breath. The day of reckoning was coming, and no one, not Daniel, not Clara, not Edward, could stop it. The morning of the wedding arrived with a heaviness in the air, the sky an iron-gray sheet. I sat at the back of the church as guests bustled in, their voices rising in excitement, their clothes a sea of silk and black suits. The organ hummed, chandeliers gleamed, but my chest felt tight, as though every breath had to fight its way through a wall. I had promised myself I would sit quietly, endure with dignity. But deep down, I knew, this day wouldn't end quietly. When my daughter appeared at the aisle, radiant in her gown, the room erupted in gasps. Tears pricked my eyes despite everything. No matter how far she had drifted, she was still mine. Still the little girl I had once carried on my hip, whispering bedtime stories until she fell asleep. But joy was fleeting. The reception came, wine glasses filled, forks clinked against plates. Then it was time for speeches. Edward stood first, commanding the room with his booming voice. Today, we celebrate not just a marriage, but a family united by love and sacrifice. Daniel has been a pillar of strength for his daughter. He has provided, protected, and prepared her for this beautiful new chapter. Applause thundered. My heart pounded. Not one word about me. Then my daughter rose, her smile bright, eyes shining as she lifted her glass. For one fragile second, I thought, maybe she'll remember me. Maybe she'll acknowledge the years no one else had seen. Instead, she began with a laugh. This day is perfect, except for one thing. My mother. Her words sliced through the air. Murmurs spread. She continued, listing grievances twisted into mockery. how I was always working instead of attending every recital, how I was too strict when she wanted freedom, how she had finally found stability with her father and his family. Each line was a dagger, sharpened by Edward's hand, delivered by my own child. Around the room, smug smiles bloomed. Clara smirked. Daniel leaned back, satisfied. And Edward sat there like a king, swirling his wine, basking in the spectacle. The humiliation was unbearable. My throat closed. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes. My hands gripped the tablecloth so tightly, my knuckles turned white. And then, silence. Because Edward, of all people, rose to his feet. He set his glass down with a deliberate clink, commanding attention. His smile remained, but there was something different in his eyes, something sharp. "Well," he said, his voice cutting through the hush, "I think it's time we speak about the real truth here." The room froze. My daughter blinked in confusion. Daniel frowned. Edward straightened his jacket. "You've all heard one side of the story, the side where Daniel looks like a hero. But let's not pretend. He left when his daughter was a child. He abandoned his responsibilities, left her mother to raise her alone. While he lived freely, she worked herself to the bone, kept a roof over their heads, food on the table, clothes on her back. That woman sitting there," he pointed directly at me, "is the reason your bride stands here today." Gasps rippled through the room. Daniel shot to his feet. "Edward." But Edward silenced him with a glare. "Don't interrupt. You might have money now, but money doesn't erase the past. You abandoned your family. And as for you, Clara," his gaze sliced to her, "you've done nothing but play mother when it suited you. But you'll never replace the woman who carried the real weight." My daughter's face drained of color. She looked from Edward to me, her lips parting, her eyes flickering with something: recognition, shame, disbelief. For the first time in years, the room wasn't laughing at me. They were seeing me. The silence was heavy, broken only by the clink of someone nervously setting down a fork. I rose slowly, my voice steady though my body trembled. "I don't want apologies," I said softly, my eyes sweeping the room. "I want change, respect, truth. That's all I've ever wanted." And for the first time, the weight lifted. Because the truth wasn't whispered in secret anymore. It had been spoken in the open, where no one could deny it. And it hadn't even come from me. The silence after Edward's words stretched long and heavy, the kind of silence that forces people to look at themselves. Daniel's face flushed crimson, his jaw working furiously as if he might argue. But no words came. Clara stared at the tablecloth, her perfect smile crumbling at the edges. And my daughter, she looked like a child again, blinking back tears, caught between the story she had been told and the one that had just been laid bare. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, but for once, it wasn't judgment. It was recognition. It was truth settling into the air, undeniable. The master of ceremonies awkwardly cleared his throat, trying to lighten the mood, but the evening had shifted. The laughter didn't come as easily, the music didn't fill the hall the same way. A fracture had opened and no amount of champagne could glue it back together. I slipped out early, the cold night air biting against my cheeks. For the first time in weeks, I breathed deeply. My shoulders felt lighter, my steps steadier. The fallout came quickly. Within days, whispers spread, not about me this time, but about Daniel and Clara. People who had once nodded along to their narrative now questioned it. Did he really abandon them back then? She made herself look like a saint, but was it just a performance? Edward's revelation had been a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples reached far. My daughter came to see me a week later. She stood at my doorway, her eyes rimmed red, holding the blue dress I'd once bought her at 16. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I kept it. I didn't understand back then. Tears blurred my vision, but I pulled her into my arms. For the first time in years, I felt her weight against me, not as a stranger, but as my child. Healing wouldn't be instant, it never is, but the door had opened. Daniel, on the other hand, avoided me. Shame clung to him like a shadow, and though he tried to act unbothered, his authority had cracked. Even Clara seemed to shrink beside him, her charm losing its shine. And Edward? Strangely enough, he never apologized, but he didn't need to. He had exposed the truth for reasons of his own, perhaps, but the result was the same. He had ripped the mask off Daniel and Clara, and in doing so, given me back my voice. I began to rebuild. Therapy sessions continued, helping me plant roots in firmer soil. At the diner, co-workers noticed the change in me: straighter posture, steadier laughter. I started painting again, something I hadn't touched in years. Each brushstroke felt like reclaiming a part of myself. One evening, I took the old wooden jewelry box from its hiding place. It was battered now, stuffed with years of pain and proof. But I didn't need it as a weapon anymore. Instead, I emptied it, carefully placing the photographs into an album, one my daughter and I began filling together with new memories. The lawyer's letter, the notes, the recordings, I burned them in the fireplace. Watching the flames consume the lies felt like closing a chapter I no longer needed to reread. The jewelry box, once heavy with sorrow, now sat light and empty on my shelf. But not forgotten, not discarded, a reminder that truth, though buried, can never be destroyed. Months later, when my daughter invited me to dinner at her new home, I walked in not as the forgotten shadow, but as her mother, the one who had endured, the one who had been vindicated. The opening humiliation at her wedding still haunted me, but it no longer defined me. The final image I carried wasn't their smirks, but the look in her eyes when she realized who I truly was. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Maybe you've lived through something like this: favoritism that cut deeper than words, betrayal that made you question your worth, or power used to silence you. If you have, then you know what I learned that night. Truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how tightly people try to bury it. So, let me ask you, have you ever faced a moment when someone tried to erase your story? When they thought they had the power to define who you were? Share it in the comments. You never know who might need to hear your strength, because worth isn't something they give you, it's something you claim for yourself. And once you claim it, no one can ever take it away.